so when I hear people attacking pork particularly, I'm just like, oh, why are we doing this again? Why is this the 15th revolution of us being like, what can people access easiest? That's bad food.
Welcome back to Making It Awkward. I'm Jessica Wilson, clinical dietitian and author of It's Always Been Ours. You can find me on Instagram at jessicawilson.msrd. You can watch this show on YouTube. This is a fully independent podcast supported by the members of the Patreon community. When you join as a paid member for as little as $3 a month, my dad will give you a shout out on the show.
Welcome, Kelly, Rebecca. Thank you very much for joining the Patreon.
This week, members of the Patreon community got a photo recap of my weekend visit with farmer-in-residence Trampus Harmon and his cows. You can also support the show by rating it on your favorite podcast app, commenting on YouTube, and writing an Apple Podcast review. You can also email the pod at makingitawkwardpod@gmail.com. Another way to support the show is to buy awkward merch from the podcast website, including stickers and shirts that say I came, I saw, I made it awkward. This episode is a follow-up to my conversation with the Consciously, but listening or finishing the previous episode was not needed in order to learn a lot from my guest today, Dr. Bethany Johnson. She covers a lot of ground as a medical historian, including raw milk and formaldehyde, the idea of poor people food shifting over time and always connected to class and race, the history of eating other game meats, including raccoon, and the history and stereotypes about the consumption of both pork and chicken among Black communities. Bethany is a longtime listener of this podcast and follower of the Consciously, and notes that the Consciously did not do the things for which he is best known in making his initial video about bacon and cigarettes increasing one's risk of cancer, and when he was supposedly debating me in good faith on the show. On this podcast, the Consciously disclosed that he is in a partnership with the organization Farm Forward, on behalf of whom he was arguing his position. And Bethany and I discussed that this compromised his ability to engage in a true debate. If you have any feedback on this episode or the previous one with the Consciously, you can feel free to email it to makingitawkwardpod@gmail.com. And with that, Dr. Bethany Johnson, welcome back to the show.
Yay, thanks for having me back.
I love that on Thursday when the Consciously episode aired, I got to wake up to your text messages. And it wasn't even the last one. You hadn't even, I don't think you'd even finished the episode.
No. Yeah, I'm always like, I'm really glad. I hope she has this set to silent because of the time difference. Yeah. And then I was like, then I could just freely react. I'm definitely one of those people that I listen to your podcast as soon as it comes out every week. And then I'm trying not to over text you my reactions in real time. But as someone who's followed Consciously for years on the internet, I was really interested to see what was going to happen with this. And then I was kind of like, well, he's not consciously-ing, like he's not doing the Consciously thing. And when he was talking about his work, he talked about how he does power analysis, which, yeah, he does. And I think he reaches a lot of people that someone like myself who's in the classroom doesn't really have a presence on social media. Mm-hmm. He can reach people that I can't. Mm-hmm. And I love his work. And I just felt like there was no power analysis in the original video or really in the follow-up and I was just baffled because I was like, I know that he knows this. And then it got to the Farm Forward part and I was like, oh, okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, that limits it, right? Because he was talking a lot about debate. And I will say up front, I did not participate in debate. I know very little about it, but from what I do know, I think, especially at the collegiate level, you get a topic and you have to practice both sides and they do a coin toss at the event and then you get assigned the side that you have to argue. So you have to be pretty well informed on it on both sides. But some of the points we're bringing up, and I thought it was great that he was open to it. I was like, yeah, you should be informed on this as well if you're approaching it from a debate context. But then again, he got forward thing and I was like, oh, this is a partnership thing and like pay Black people. I'm very much on that team. And it limits when you're doing that kind of partnership sort of what perspective you can speak from. So I went and looked at the Farm Forward website and I was like, oh, okay, they're really focused on factory farming, animal factory farming, which, yes, is very bad for the environment, is not great for workers at all. This is the industry that's like, yes, 14-year-olds should be allowed to work shifts here, right? So I am not pro-animal corporate factory farming. Correct. And also, the agency does not talk about injustice in the rest of the food production system, what people have access to. There's some talk of portion control. I had questions, and I think, Farm Forward has its place. The agencies it's very clear on its perspective, but after reviewing their materials, I was like, okay, I understand now why the Consciously said what he did, but it is a departure from some of his other work, especially because he didn't question at all the WHO list and how those kinds of things come to be. And I was kind of like, but no.
Right. The debating of it all, first of all, that was fascinating to me. Like he was also debating the semantics of it all, not the actual substance too. Like that was fun. I'm like, you're using these debate terms to like frame this as a debate. I am framing it as you're wrong. Like I'm not framing, this is not a debate framing here.
Right.
You don't understand this.
Are really important for policy. Policy is made based on the literal words used. They have legal import. So the words you are bringing in actually matter to policy about these issues and to people's literal food access based on policy. That threw me too. Because I was like, Jessica's not just doing semantics.
Right. I am asking you if you understand what you said. And no, the answer was no. And at the end-ish, I said, so did they just give you this research and ask you to share it? And he was like, absolutely no. I do my own research. I was like, how is that possible? Like, you clearly did not. Even if you looked at this list of 100 plus things, research would have been like, how did they get on this list?
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's research. To me.
I thought it was really helpful that you mentioned wood fiber or wood dust pulp. What one of those? Again, the word is important and I don't have the right one, but it was something in that neighborhood. And I was like, we're not even at dose makes the poison here in this conversation, which you were. Is this somebody who's like your dad has a wood pile out back and maybe he's doing a little something in his garage now and then? Or are we talking about people that plain wood 12 hours a day for 20 years? That is a very different amount of this potential carcinogen. You and I were talking about, I said, remind me of Dr. Oz. When the bacon thing it was in the ether, it's not a new announcement, but the alcohol being added to the level 1 carcinogen, Dr. Oz came out and literally was like, yeah, but this builds community and it makes conversation easier. And I was like, it's interesting that he's out here saying this about alcohol and not charcuterie trays, which people can also gather around, but are apparently also level 1 carcinogens. And it was like, oh, well, he has a relationship with the alcohol industry. So that's interesting that he is America's doctor and is out here like, alcohol is kind of fine because of the social connection piece. And I was like, yeah, no, food has no social connection power. So thanks for that, Dr.
Thanks.
Oz.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And the idea that the chemicals in pork were the same ones in other things that cause cancer. So it was like chemicals. And and he said, I would make that argument. Like, I would say yes to that. And I was like, I would say yes to that is way different than that is true or that is false. Like
whether or not you would debate that and try to defend that as a professional and very nationally recognized debater has nothing to do with whether or not it's true.
Yes.
Actually, like you can't tell me that bacon contains the same chemicals that a nail tech is being subjected to every day. You cannot tell me that because I know that it is not true. Because I know even in like the quality of it, right? So you have a lot of people out here that'll be like, aluminum is in vaccines, mercury is in vaccines. Okay, well, we have to have a conversation about ethyl and methyl mercury then. Those are not the same. One of them is poisonous, one of them is not. And so it could actually be the same chemicals, but it's the dose, it's the chemical composition. So to your point, which I think you made well, and I think the consciously came around to in the end, like, we actually have to talk about what these things are and what they mean. And that is not a semantic exercise. That is literally distinguishing between type and scale of poison and non-poison.
Right. And to back up, like, these things are not poisonous. Also, like, in the amounts that we're going to be having, like, poison, like the sun, I would not say is poison, you know? So right. Yes, like, we have to just talk and know that these things are true or not true. And
like the Diet Coke rat study, you know, I know people, Diet Coke is a thing, like people are very committed to it. And, you know, we all heard like it has aspartame in it, it causes cancer. You would have to have 20 cans a day for like 17 years before that would be the thing that would give you cancer. And it's like, I think we have other things to worry about, like what's in our water and in our air that could also be. And that's another question I have too. When you're looking at these lists, everybody's living in a different context. Somebody might be affected differently who lives in the place that they literally call Cancer Row.
Right.
They might have a lower threshold of tolerance for some of these things because they live in a uniquely, horrifically toxic environment, which we've decided to put predominantly Black folks into, and the corporations there get away with it. And this is like a long-standing documented thing.
Right.
But it's like, but what is it, the environment, or is it the ultra-processed food that they're eating in their house? These are questions that most people entering these conversations haven't asked and don't have answers to. And a lot of scientists don't have answers to it. We don't know.
Right. I think that's the thing too. Right. Yeah. And also the idea of chemicals, like I read out the definition of what a processed meat is. And it was like anything that is going to be shelf stable. So like salt, something salted or smoked, right, would be a processed meat in this scenario. So like, it doesn't necessarily have, quote, chemicals. I mean, everything is a chemical. Like everything's a chemical. Right. But like the argument you're making also doesn't stand up, because what you're talking about is chemicals, whatever they are. And like salt, I don't think, sir, that you would say that salt is a chemical in the framing that you're using. So again, like the research over me search that you've done, like you haven't done either of them. I don't even know what you refer to.
He has in other areas. I've also heard him talk about like food apartheid and similar concepts. And so I'm like, I don't understand. Maybe, do you feel like you have to defend it because it's a brand partnership here with an org? Yeah. And so that's where you are like directing your debate abilities towards, because I know you know about this other stuff. Yeah, that's why I was just like, he's not consciously-ing it. What is happening?
Well, yeah, so let's get into the food apartheid portion. And he said, oh gosh, the food companies are like the cartel, and I just let that one, like we just let that one simmer, we'll say. Yes, for a while. But in the food apartheid conversations and access to grocery stores, right? Like, do you just forget those arguments? Yes. Or I don't, it sounded like he believed what he said, which again could come from the debating of it all, or there was just no connection made, right? Like these things not necessarily are separate, but like, this is my lane. This is what I'm talking about here. All of these things that I've either known, I either don't connect them, or like Farm Forward doesn't care about them, so I don't care about them. And so yes, not consciously it, but also I think it's possible that folks just don't connect these things because people yell so loudly about, quote, processed meat that is all we can think about perhaps in that moment. It's so activating, just like, or inspiring of emotion that the rest falls away.
He said it was a hook, right? That he could get people with a hook. And I was like, yeah, I just wish the hook wasn't let's talk about the dirty food that poor people eat, and let's talk about how it's bad for the 200th year in a row. And let's talk about what the wealthy white people think is gross and now will be cancer causing versus what they've recycled into being good. Like the RFK Jr. of it all, like it's neat that you're a Weston A. Pricer now who was a literal dentist in Ohio, in Cincinnati in like 1938. And now you want to make awful like OFFAL burritos. And now this isn't like a gross food that poor people eat anymore because you've decided it's part of the way that we can take individual responsibility for our health by eating whole foods. But you as a white wealthy person get to decide which whole foods are good, which is why you're talking about kale and not collard greens, right?
I have heard, yes, people talk about greens, meaning kale. And it's a moment. It's definitely a moment. And I say they're wrong, but that's fine. The Weston A. Price, just shout out. That was something that somebody recommended, like a podcast run by them when I was at the Maha rally. They were like, you need to hear his story and talk about it. I was like, okay, I'm glad I'm glad for you that you found something that speaks to you. But yeah, he was a dentist, right?
Yeah. And can I just go on like a 4-minute rant about his raw milk thing? I need to give some historical context here. So he was saying in 1938 that you should drink raw milk. He was a grown person, which he experienced in his lifetime, knowing that thousands of children in every city every year were dying of poisoning from raw milk and poisoning from tainted milk. And with his whole chest, he was like, we should go back to that. Sir, you know what happens. It took the city of Philadelphia 25 years to overcome people drinking raw milk because they could not afford to access or pasteurize at home. And at the same time, because the government was like, that's not our business for most of American history. Yeah, these quote unquote big milk farmers were putting, in some cases, water, lead paint, and other things to stretch the milk. And they were taking that milk and bringing it into immigrant neighborhoods, and people could afford it. And then their children died of lead poisoning or died of formaldehyde poisoning because they used to put formaldehyde in it because formaldehyde has a sweet taste and it would cover up the sourness of the spoiled milk. So they could sell it for longer. This is before we had refrigeration systems that were good. I'm talking 1905, 1896 to 1912. So they were dying from that. And then people would go out to farmers and get raw milk and try to work around the adulteration system, get to it before it was adulterated, and then they would die of salmonella poisoning. And so what happened was white lady progressives, it's really interesting because to me as a historian, so I study health and medicine. This is something you and I have talked about before. People might have caught a session where I was talking about epidemics. Why am I talking about food so much? And do I think I know about everything? Absolutely not. But when you study the history of health and medicine, you read about a lot of interconnected things. So when I'm reading about public health programs in cities that also combat epidemics, I'm reading about agencies that are doing work in the space of making sure people can have safe, unadulterated food was the kind of language they used at the time. And I'm reading annual reports where I'm reading about all these kids dying of scarlet fever and polio because there was no vaccine at the time. And they have 3 pages in there about milk. So I have to read this stuff to get to what I'm studying. So I've read a lot about milk that I was not looking for. And so what they did was they set up milk stations all over Philadelphia, and the agencies would buy milk, test it for chemicals like formaldehyde and lead, make sure that it was not adulterated, and then they would pasteurize it, sometimes in-house at the milk clinic, meaning they would boil it for 2 minutes. And then they would have it. And to come to these clinics to get milk that you knew would not kill your children, you had to submit to a physical exam for your child.
Interesting. Where
they could get measured, but it also caught a lot of things. potential vitamin K deficiency, needing to have your eyes treated so that you would not end up blind. That's that goopy stuff they put on babies' eyes that I've also heard people complain about on TikTok. When you don't do that, blindness is a thing that can occur and occurred to thousands of people every year in every city of the country for decades until we were like, what if we didn't do that? And so these are the things that these folks are looking for, and people had to submit. So there's like some consent issues here, right? And then they could bring home the milk or get it delivered. But then, of course, because progressive white ladies were like also like very committedly white supremacist and pronatalist and nationalist, they would be like, well, we'll also teach you how to feed your kids because you're Italian, so you don't know how to do that. And I'll come to your tenement apartment tomorrow, and then I'll tell you all your business, and then I'll bring you more milk. So it was like, we'll provide unadulterated foods in exchange for our ability to tell you how to do these other things. And that is where I end up reading all these descriptions of what they thought poor people food was and why they thought it was bad and why they thought it literally turned people into criminals.
Okay, say more about that.
Okay. So there were some progressive women who wrote a book in 1922 all about their campaign in the Southwest to get Mexican American people to stop eating tortillas and spiced beef because it was turning them to vice and criminality, which, wow. We're not talking about social hierarchies here. We're not talking about environment that you live. We're not talking about being underpaid. And that might be why you might be taking food, because your children are starving. And instead, they were like, you need to use this. They particularly targeted menudo, which is like this amazing food, like a stew, soup. And they said, instead of that, you should have, these are 3 choices: oyster soup, potato soup, or celery soup. No, they were like, this will save you. This will Americanize you. This will help you assimilate, which should be your goal, because white American culture is the only good culture. And so it was always political. It was always deeply tied to how well are you assimilating, which always meant becoming like a white middle-class person who ate the sauce that they suggested people use was like flour, milk, and fat.
Like a roux, but without spices, or no?
Yeah. Just very, I'm like, the jokes about historical white food are all just accurate. It's just right. Like, you look at the recipes they would put, or like, we taught them how to make, and then that's in the annual report. I'm like, that sounds truly terrible. Like really, really bad. Celery soup? No, thank you.
I'm sure that Campbell still makes a cream of celery soup.
I don't even know if they put cream in it. Bless.
Oh no, I don't. Well, we'll have to look. But yes, the poor people food of it all. That was another thing that was like top of mind when listening to the original reel. Like, I do follow him, but I see less of his stuff because I don't interact with it. But I was just like, what are we doing? Like, how are you also in like it was near July 4th. And so like cookouts is something else that was on my mind. So 2 things. One, okay, that's separate, but like, what are you telling Black people right now? What are you saying to Black people who are inherently associated with, and it was particularly processed pork foods, not like all, meat foods, not all processed meats, that all of these things are giving you cancer. Like, basically what you're saying is, if you make this choice, this is a you problem. If you're making these choices, if you're feeding this to your family, if you're enjoying these foods, you're actively giving yourself cancer. And I was like, how, one, do we separate that from Blackness, but also poor people, quote, poor people foods is another thing that I was thinking about, / shelf stable foods, and anything that we might find, that's going to last, spam, which I'll have another episode about. But like, the poor people food, the association with Blackness, it was just too much. But we could, and here isn't the thing, like that conversation was, we only got a bit of it. It was like over an hour long. We could have had that conversation, right? Like I could have, yes, discussed these things and that could have been the conversation, but it wasn't. And so it was just like, oh, what a disservice to Black folks, people who were, grown up, who have grown up or currently are only able to access processed foods, like for a variety of reasons.
It was such a red flag to me that it was bacon that came up. So you have experts come in, you have Black folks that are going to come and talk about Black foodways and some of these really deep traditions. I'm going to leave that for them. What I will say about what white folks did in the South is Black folks for hundreds of years were able to most easily access pork because it was the most accessible and affordable food aside from animals you would trap in the forest, like raccoons and possums. So we know where that racial slur likely comes from. To call someone a coon had to do with that you were eating raccoons. Now, the raccoons are actually a really historic fare because indigenous people ate raccoons because it was a form of protein all up and down the East Coast. And there's a moment in the early 1700s when raccoons were also stewed on American tables because they didn't have they didn't have enough farm animals yet to really support the American interest in eating animals. So there are stories of, there's a woman who went to finishing school in Philadelphia. She goes back home on the holiday, and her father's cook is a woman from a rural area in the colony, and she is trying to impress, this daughter who's now an adult. And so she does this style that is sort of out of fashion, is what the story is about. This daughter being like, I can't believe that we're still doing this out here. So you make, 15 dishes, 12 of them are different kinds of proteins. You have squab, you have turkey, you have pork, you have mutton, you have raccoon, you have maybe possum, and you're doing all different kinds of stews and braisings, and you're putting it out, and there's breads, and there's cornbread, and there's 3 vegetables, but most of it is protein. It's all different kinds of animals, and it's just sort of a chaotic table, but that is to demonstrate abundance. Mm-hmm. That is to demonstrate wealth, right? That's to demonstrate, look at all that we have access to. And at the time in the cities, in the early 1700s, people were moving towards courses, right? Where you don't put everything on the table at once. And you certainly don't put raccoon on your table anymore. But this was a food that people ate because they needed to eat it. And poor white people were eating raccoon for 100 years. And people did not call them that. Gee, I wonder what the difference is, right? Poor white people were eating the same thing as poor Black people. But because we live in a racist, anti-Black society, there were only some people who were overly associated with the food. White people, particularly as Reconstruction falls in the South, make chicken very hard to come by. So that is the root of the joke about Black folks and chicken. There were people who observed people eating chicken in a really special day because it was really expensive. White people ensured it was hard to come by. And there was a lot of joy about eating it at that point because it was a special, not everyday food. And then it becomes a racist trope, right? Because why are you so enthusiastic about this food that us middle-class white folks can process, can access at any time? All of these poor people foods are the things that are easier to access and the proteins that are more available to people. And it became associated with class and race from the beginning. And it remained so. There were white people in certain parts of the colonies that would not eat raccoons because they knew indigenous people and freed people had done so in the Southeast. And that was the only reason they gave. Well, I don't want to be like those people. So yeah, the choice then was pork. That's why you have, your ham hocks and your collards. And so when I hear people attacking pork particularly, I'm just like, oh, why are we doing this again? Why is this the 15th revolution of us being like, what can people access easiest? That's bad food. So, and I will call myself out on this. 20 years ago, they couldn't figure out what was going on with my health. It turns out I have ADHD and I had crashed real hard, but no one knew that's what I had. They thought I had like dietary issues and inflammation. And so I was put on by Dr. Andrew Weil, the Cornell Institute. He was the wellness guy of the Omnivore's Dilemma generation. He had a supplement line. My doctor had done a residency with him, my local insurance covered doctor. And so they put me on elimination diets, which did nothing. I couldn't have white flour, sugar, caffeine, alcohol, corn. It was just, it was a rough time. And then eventually it was a rough time. I was a sad, sad person because I didn't know how to cook without these things because I'm a SNAP kid. I eat shelf-stable foods, among other things. I didn't have any experience cooking this way, but the language that was used when I was put on this 4-week journey was that I was eating clean. Mm-hmm. And then I was eating whole foods. So I was telling people that at the time. Oh, yeah. So when some of that language has come, so I look back and I'm like, man, I probably really did some harm. Because something I talk about with my students a lot, I'm sure there's an actual academic term for this. We call it coining in my classes. When you're saying something, you're always also kind of saying the reverse. So when I'm saying that I'm eating clean food, I'm also saying that people are eating dirty or filthy food. Because I'm establishing my food as clean, right? Who can access clean food? Shockingly, not poor people, right? So interesting that every time we pick the best food, it is the food that the least people have access to. And the people in power right now, this came up a lot in your conversation with Leslie, where she didn't seem to realize that no one actually has access to the food that she's suggesting that people eat. Who can afford this? Who can be these TikTok moms that we talked about earlier who are milling wheat in their own kitchen and making Cheez-Its that they are coloring with turmeric? Bless. I love that for you. You're also getting paid to do that, and you're getting brand deal. That is your source of income. I'm going to teach 60 students a week for 15 weeks this fall, and I have to gallop them through American health history from 1650 to 1850. I'm not making cheeses from scratch. It's not happening.
So this is something you and I chatted about, yay, people who are educators on the internet, in theory, getting paid for what they're doing. Yeah. We love this idea. How are they getting paid? Who is funding this quote educational content? I don't know when things started to shift where it became incredibly obvious that people had deviated from what their, original educational goals were. And so now with this parasocial relationship that we have, particularly say with Consciously, we now believe, anything that he says. And why wouldn't we? I got a voice memo from a dietitian who saw the original reel where he was yelling at us. And she said, yeah, I didn't even get to the end. I liked it because I like him at the end. And I was like, yeah, so that, will drive engagement to the reel where, more people are just going to feel bad for their food choices. Mm-hmm. That's something that came to mind. And then I was living in Oakland when the renaissance of soul food was happening. Yes. And when I would go to the white spaces, right, the food trucks particularly would have crispy pork belly. And I was just like, wait a second. What is happening? It was also when Oakland was doing a lot of gentrification. And it was like, so is this the next, here goes the neighborhood? It used to be the coffee shop in a neighborhood. Is pork belly the new, there goes the neighborhood. And yes, there ended up being 3 soul food restaurants only that I had been to. There were far more. And one was actually 2 were super duper, so long lines. And then you'd get in there and it would be all mostly pork products from like every part of the animal. Yep. And how, and it wasn't even like, look at us, we're so progressive for eating the whole thing. It was like, look at us being so cool for eating offal, or, you know, these turkey necks or these ham hocks. And then people were buying ham hocks, and, you know, oxtails were the most recent one that people were like, why is this? Why is this expensive? Like, I've been using,
because white people decided this is fancy food now. Right? Yes. That's what happened with pork belly. Once you have it at one of those restaurants, the Dr. What's-his-face was like, have you ever been to a 5-star restaurant? You're like, yeah. Well, once they started using pork belly, suddenly it was okay. But like, it wasn't okay for all of this time before that. It was considered dirty food that only poor people ate. Mm-hmm. And so I'm seeing this with, hi, beef tallow.
Oh, right.
Right? RFK Jr. is like all over that. And now we're going to fry this in beef tallow. Yeah. That has a history. And there were like, people were like, indigenous people put animal tallow in their hair and on their skin to protect from the weather. And that is why they are not intelligent and should not have dominion in this land. That is what natural philosophers wrote for a 60-year period at the beginning of American history. Anything can be recycled into a health food. I think you and I are very familiar with that idea. Or anything can be recycled into a good food or a bad food. What really depends on what is a good food and what is a bad food is what wealthy white people think is a good or a bad food. And this is the through line of American history back to the 1850s when Chinese food first got to San Francisco.
Yeah.
Right? There was some white men that were like, I don't know what this is, but I'm leaving this restaurant and I'm going to go have some good food. And they went to a restaurant and they had mutton and squab and potatoes and a bottle of champagne. I don't know if we would call that health food now, but that was what they thought good food was at the time. And so, yeah, every time people are like, that's poison, I'm like, today it's poison. I'm not saying there's no scientific basis for any of this. Nutritional science is notoriously hard to pin down, particularly because you can't make the environment the same for everybody. You can't, unless you house people and give them prepackaged food. Oh no. And that's real expensive. So those kind of studies are just really hard to do. So I just see so much toggling that when I saw that video of his, I was like, oh, why are we doing this?
Why are we doing this?
Why are we doing this? Especially at a time when food costs have exploded. That's what really pokes me in the eye about this. That I'm like, so we've decided that only organic whole foods and then like buying a half of a cow from Trampus, which I want people to do, right? He's selling out. I love that for him. How many of your clients can do that? Trampus knows that, but like how many of your clientele can do that? Well, they'd have to have a deep freeze. They have to have somewhere to put it. They, you know, all these other things in place that when people are like, this is how people should eat. I really relate to how you continually ask these questions. And these are the questions I'm asking in my classroom. How?
How?
You going to provide it? Make it happen. What is your plan? Stop telling people not to eat certain things and to eat other things unless you are providing it for people. If you are not providing it for people, pipe down because that information is not helpful. That's not helpful.
No. So I didn't walk away thinking that we had a debate. Whereas, you know, years ago when I talked to Jeff Hutt, for folks who haven't dug back in the catalog, he was the Make America Healthy Again spokesperson, like initially before he was like too old and like, and not cute enough, so he got booted out. But anyhow, I walked away from his very persuasive conversation being like, oh, like I do want clean water. I want clean soil. Did he just hoodwink me like into being, quote, on the side of Make America Healthy Again? I did not walk away from this conversation thinking that I had lost a debate by any means. So that's the connection there. I was not persuaded. Like he was saying my side and his side. And I was like, I did not walk away thinking that there was two sides. How about that?
And what I was like, I know that the Consciously historically has been like, hey, bro, let's debate, like, let's to get together on this topic. And then they did a debate, like a traditional debate style.
Okay.
And I was like, that isn't working here because you didn't ask him to debate. You asked him to come and have a more nuanced conversation. And he's doing funded project work here. So that doesn't, his traditional model didn't really work here. So when he came in strong on the debate thing, I was like, what's happening? I know that this is what your context is, but like you come and do this on people's podcasts when they have agreed to debate you. That's not what happened here. So what are we doing? Also, again, when we got to the farm forward thing at the end, I was like, this isn't even the right context for a debate because you're doing paid work, which again, pay people. I don't have a problem with that, but I wish that had come up sooner because then it made the debate thing at the beginning make like even less sense to me. So I was like,
and some regular listeners were like, I don't think I could finish this episode. Like he is being ridiculous and I just can't like participate in this facade of a debate when there really wasn't one. And okay, in his initial video, he said, I came across this organization called Farm Forward. He did not come across this organization of Farm Forward. He could have also said, like, I partnered with Farm Forward, and that would sound like somewhat altruistic, like, because we agree on these values. No, they approached him because he did something in the past. And I was like, so one, you didn't disclose that, yay, influencer culture. And two, why are we even, debating this when you cannot come in with actual values that are not tied up in a partnership that you need to make money off of. So in my critiques too, like, do I also, in my critiques of him and my critiques of influencer culture, like, do I bring in like the organizations like Farm Forward and critique them as well is an interesting question that I'm thinking about, because that would only take money perhaps out of his pocket if I were going to say, hey, Farm Forward, you were wrong.
Right. And like, I do think there is a space for people to be, it doesn't bother me when people are like, I'm in a paid partnership. I'm like, great, that is good to
I know. It's a commercial. Like, this is a commercial. I'm moving on.
And that won't stop me from looking into the product or the agency. If he had said, I'm in a partnership with Farm Forward, I'm learning some things. Did you know that the WHO, like even that, I would have been like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to go check out Farm Forward, which I did anyway, because he said he was in a partnership with them. And so then I was like, well, let me understand, where this is coming from. And they're doing they have on their website, they're like, factory farms are mostly in communities where Black and brown people live. That's absolutely true. Mm-hmm. And there's a long history of that as well. There weren't questions about, if you want people to eat differently, how will you provide their food? That was not a question that was asked. Mm-hmm. That was not something that was addressed. Animal welfare and how animal factory farm workers are being treated was an issue. But then they were like, and I'm a vegan. And as I said earlier, okay, I'd like to introduce you to the migrant farm workers' rights movement, which has been going strong for 60 years. The things that were happening in Central Valley, California, those were about grapes and lettuce, which are vegan foods, right? Those can also be oppressive systems. Just because you're not eating an animal doesn't mean that you have rights as a worker in America. It's capitalism. They want to make money. Growers don't care. They don't care unless they're required to care by law. Mm-hmm. So in that way, the Consciously and I really overlap, except he was only talking about animal factory farms. I think we could talk about all of them, all corporate farms.
It would be interesting for me to make an actually engaging video and pretend that I am partnering with Farm Forward, like to do that over again, because I could come in hard about the impacts to Black and brown neighborhoods, right?
Yes.
Like that, which would be true and align. Yes, with Farm Forward, and could be really engaging, but we're going to yell about bacon and cigarettes. So maybe that would be interesting for me to be like, hey, you don't have to be weird about food in order to do this partnership. And what you're choosing to do.
About moralizing food. Yeah.
Well, yeah. And not even the moralizing, like you didn't have to lie. You didn't have to like misrepresent research. You didn't have to like pretend that you knew the full picture of something when you didn't. This didn't have to be a debate, because if you had actually, said things that were both truth and an honest representation of the facts, we wouldn't be here. I would just I may have liked that reel. And maybe even shared it.
I do think that there's a gap between, I think the consciously is power analysis can be really great. I think he's done a lot of great historical stuff. He's pointed out power imbalances within structures, within policy. I think there's some science literacy missing there.
1,000% that we don't require of people we have parasocial relationships with.
Yeah.
Not at all.
Yeah. And I was like, yes, okay. And like texting you like, thank you, when you were like, right. But what amount of these causes why are they put together in this list? There's so many other questions to ask, to your point. And I do think the science literacy outside of like people in the profession like you and science communicators, like it's so bad that I'm having a class of students this fall look up mis and disinformation about health and medicine related issues, food related issues, and we're going to use the materials we are studying in class to do corrective response videos that are also not super jerky, because I don't think anyone wants me to teach that. And also no one wants to see me on TikTok. So I'm like, let's put the babies on TikTok.
But are you sure about that?
I'm not sure about that.
I would love to see you on TikTok. A medical historian on TikTok. This sounds amazing.
Feel like, do you want to hear about the campaign for measles vaccinations? Because I have stories.
Listeners who are on social media, message me. Let me know if we should support Bethany being on social media and saying the things that it sounds like she is already very passionate about to the audience. Yeah.
Maybe it would be better for my students, because they wouldn't have to get me at full blast on all these issues. I could off gas a little onto TikTok and they wouldn't be like, oh, okay, professor.
It's true. And that's how they're consuming a lot of science. And then they can see, like, this is how you could actually present science versus whatever I got over here. So I love this idea. And so we're going to do that. We're going to convince you, I think.
Yeah, TikTok. I don't know. I need some help with a clever handle, because.
Oh, okay. If people have ideas, send them.
My last name is Johnson. I don't have a whole lot to work with, or it will get dirty real fast, and like I can't do that professionally. So
fair. I get that. All right, Bethany, thank you for coming back to the show.
Thanks, Jessica. It's always great to talk to you and to learn from you. I learn from your podcast every time.
Thanks so much to Bethany for coming back on the show. If folks think that she should be on TikTok and have an idea for a handle, feel free to share them at makingitawkwardpod@gmail.com. We've got a couple more follow-up episodes, including the history and consumption of spam. I'll also be back with a conversation about chemophobia. If folks want to support this independent podcast, you can join the Patreon, you can review the podcast, you can leave a comment on YouTube and write a review for Apple Podcasts. This has been Making It Awkward. I'm Jessica Wilson, clinical dietitian and your host. The show is edited by Jen Jacobs, who does not drink raw milk with formaldehyde in it. Until next time, friends, make it awkward.